messo.
Good afternoon. This is October 29th, 2024. This is my very first attempt in sharing both the podcast and video with YouTube to start my presentation about the system of counseling and the psychology I have acquired, learned, deciphered, and evolved over this past 45 years is the psychology of round and square. In many ways, this use of the psychology in the system of the developed from the educational psychology now into a communicative psychology, and in the field of counseling psychology, I will try very hard to present in the most simplistic way this changes and evolutions from psychology, even starting as early with the Freudian psychoanalysis, and then the influence by the American humanist psychology. There were many of them, just a few names: Rollo May, Alfred Adler, Erich Fromm, Gustavo Jung, and Carl Rogers. And the development of all this had impacted and influenced the overall development of the first phase of the psychology of round and square, which is called the 3 C's, where I have developed this in 1975 during my obtaining my degree of my master's in counseling psychology. What is very interesting is from the early part of the graphics. Now that we are so often using computer graphics and images, and I'm composing my development here in the use of Canva and plus other images. The 3 C's, and I want to make another very strong register by using all this oval and round spheres. One of the major 3 C's starting is with the cultural sphere, because this cultural spheres literally had gotten me from the time when I was born in China, raised in Macau, the dialectic differences, the language spoken differently from my father, my mother, and then to the area into regional, from Shanghai to Hong Kong to Macau, Cantonese. And then eventually with my engagement to the Latin and Greeks with the schoolings in Macau with the Salesians, then obviously English for most of the people, refugees or people departing from China. Most of us, the family, were aiming toward a overseas focus. As my father left the region in 1952, or since he left Shanghai. So with the linguistic exposure, English, but most very enriching for my end is the learning of Latin in serving Mass and singing Gregorian chants with the Roman Catholic school, the Salesians, or Don Bosco in Macau. So each sphere you go into, a cultural sphere, in different rooms can be using that as in the case when we moved to Brazil in '62. One room can be speaking French, the other room is Portuguese, and the other room the lady was speaking Mandarin or Cantonese or Shanghai and the local dialects. And these are the clusters which I am now using in the full scale in the picture you see here. And the 3C system is that the first cultural sphere in that particular timing point was all about the university and the college community I was involved. And then the first communication system called the communication dynamics, where I have adopted basically from the transactional analysis of Eric Burns in 1974, 73. I'm aware of the transactional analysis, but once I have seen the sets of three spheres on the other, from the other designs, you'll be seeing in the following pictures that the communication dynamics is basically showing all the languages of people that you can well, sorry, a little bit about the reluctance on my development here.
Paul, é só tirar o outro. Isso, tira um e coloca o outro. Isso, e tira o olhinho do outro. Tira o olho do outro.
Olho do...
Aqui, ó, imagem 17, ó. Tirei.
Volta 17, volta 17.
Voltei. E qual outra? Tá aqui, ó. A 12. Aí, pode continuar.
Deixa aqui. And so, with all this development here, I would like to go through the first configuration that gives you a general idea. The 3 C's you will see in the following is about dynamics, basically sharing my communication with my students and the way describe their past and present and just in general how the performance in college, and they were assigned to me to be the counselor, psychologist, and so on and so forth. The other C is all about, after we communicated, with the analysis of the interpretation, and this is where the psychology of round and square is baby steps. The psychology of round and square will come into more of effect. Basically, I started 5 years ago during the time of COVID. After 45 years, I strongly felt something I had developed. I was ready to do a separate doctoral program in 1976, but to no avail because the sets of circumstances and working conditions. We both were working at the university level and from the little town called Platteville, southwest Wisconsin, to the city of Milwaukee, at University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And I was posturing to looking for a doctoral program that can house the simple 3C communication system. But 45 years later, this is the history of our business engaged in the area of gemstones and mineral, which we can share, we can speak of it eventually. There can be also an interface, because the psychology of round and square is not limited to only educational and counseling, but it has also its application in a large community, including business. And the next evolution, moving into from psychology of round and square, it had brought me into another level of thinking. And the thinking about defining of when I have my own cultural anthropological analysis and looking back, reflecting back of my cultural past with all these years since I left the continent of China, Asia, 1962 at age 13, I have never looked back, or at least I've gone back and have done other business. But now I'm looking back to what had shaped my language skills, the early childhood intonations from the different dialects spoken in my house in Shanghai, my aunts who speak with their Guangxi dialect, but they were all rooted with Cantonese. My mother is from Canton origin, but this mix of language is as an infant searching for sound, searching for meaning, and I think this will be another impact that will be worthy of much research, which research had already started in New York in a different area. The intonation, early childhood, affecting the sound, the listening skill, the memory, and the pronunciation of the sounds and words had brought me back. But in thinking of the collective past, I come to another challenge, which, per my discovery, is about in what I have put on this graphic called the Conscienciological studies, involving my now everyday writing on and about the pedagogy of conscience. To take one step back, okay, I'm fluent in Chinese, Cantonese, Shanghai, 80% grasp understanding, Mandarin, the Putonghua, and plus English, Portuguese, Spanish, and doable Italian. All of this is because my exposure to the Latin and Greek exposure in Macau and my 5 to 6 years rich engagement with Brazil. Since we emigrated to Brazil in 1962, I stayed until 1967, came to college for 4 to 5 years, 6 years. But for the last 45 years, almost my entire business, a global business, is all involving with the gemstones and minerals of Brazil. So Brazil is my second home. The Portuguese become my second language. And because this richness of the languages had got me back into the grasp and redefined to my Western friends and scholars and academics that the Chinese do speak the language of the heart, as you shall see how many hundreds of Chinese characters using the heart, not in the Western way as a prefix, suffix, but sometimes it also is in the middle as a radical. So the language of the heart is basically now a kind of hypothesis, because put it in this kind of a perspective, you will open up to more researchers, more people who want to participate to understand what is conscience. So this is a very strong link, because conscience cannot be taught. Conscience is not a methodology. Conscience is coming out, again, in my writing of the psycholinguistics of my interest. Conscience can only come by way of our thinking. I'm inspired by Paulo Freire, of his use of conscientization from Brazil, a dear master, someone I deeply respect. And from Paulo Freire's conscientization have taken me back to the 14th century of the Chinese thinker, philosopher, Wang Yangming. And from Wang Yangming in the 1500s, I have found his creation of the Chinese confluence of the languages, and dating back to 500 BC. Here comes the Grand Masters, Confucius, Lao Tzu, who know him for Tao, and then we talk about the teaching of Buddha. As you have noticed, I purposefully not to using the terms like Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And here's a very critical point. Here is the major point, is valid to put right up in front in this segment of presenting my search, the next search, and the work ahead about conscienciology. Because the Western mindset for all these many years, the entire 4 basic Western mindset were formulated and shaped all under one Abraham, the Abrahamic value coming from Judaism, Catholicism, Protestantism, and Islamism. So we use the ism for the 4 basic value system before we call it religious or not. Okay, then they all come from this Judaic branch, the Abrahamic value system. And subsequently, even from day one, with the West conquering or taking over the discovery of America 1492 by Columbus, and the rest of the history after the Iberian, the Portuguese, and the Spanish, and they're grabbing the world. And not to forget, in speaking of the Silk Road, coming from China through the Gobi Desert, reaching the region of Turkey today, Istanbul. And in 2,000 years, the Silk Road were never interrupted, even was fully endorsed by Genghis Khan, the Mongol who conquered most of the western part to Europe. And we know Mongol was the Yuan dynasty. And to think about the long trade without interference, without any conflicts, is a huge accomplishment with the China trade in camelbacks, with porcelain and silk. And one time the silk in Rome was fetching the price of gold. There's just one Silk Road. Many of you may not have heard of another Silk Road. And this is basically, I'm emphasizing the huge Spanish empire above and beyond what you and I know today about Spain, about their entry into Mesoamerica, talking about Mexico, talking about South America, Latin America. Other than Brazil, the Portuguese, South America, the rest of the Central and Mesoamerica were dominated by Spain. And there was another very rich Silk Road commerce been going on for over 200 plus years, or until Mexico had gone independent. And just before that, I hope my audience, using your imagination, think about the vast territory of Spain, not just in Mesoamerica, but there was another Silk Road between Mexico, using the port of Acapulco, directly linked to the islands called Las Filipinas. That was the other found by another Portuguese navigator, Magellan, known in Portuguese as Fernão Magalhães, 20 years later than Columbus. And that was all coming out of the Portuguese School of Navigation, Prince Henry, right in the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula, of the Portuguese, the bottom of the country. And just for a little bit of humor and rumor mills, the Portuguese already found Brazil in 1460, before Columbus in 1492. But the story, just to tell you, to link this Las Filipinas, become today we know as Philippines, and from this journey, what had connected, expanded the Spanish Empire, not only by the trade that they had worked with the 50% of the population occupying outside of the wall of the city of the Philippines, called the Barrion, is an area where Chinese and their population was already 45 to 50% of the entire country of the Philippines under the Spanish rule. And much of that material coming in is the clothing, the silk, the mantilla, the shroud that the Mexican lady used for church head covering. All of that will come from China from the province of Fujian, and the people who speak Mainnan, or like some of those people in Taiwan, they share the local dialect. And that trade started in the Philippines, in the outside block area, because they're heathens, they're not Catholics, and so-called the Barrion. I'm just imagining the Barrion is what meaning is a big barrier or big wall. So that is this road that very few people know because it's almost like exclusive trade where the Spanish dominated. Not to forget, before the Mexican independence, before Teddy Roosevelt took on the rest of the land, the empire of Spain was going all the way from California to New Mexico, Arizona, and to Texas. So the Spanish Empire, you bring it across from the Iberian through the Atlantics into the Veracruz port entry, Havana, Acapulco, Mexico, and then on the Philippines. They had one of the largest empire with a very active trade. One of the, not secret, but very quiet trade is because the Spanish Empire in the region, they call it Capitania. I'm using that a little bit of borrowing the Portuguese ideas of the districts, is Peru. But right below Peru, the biggest mine of silver located was in Potosi, Bolivia. 70% of the silver from the production of Potosi, from the control of the Peruvian governor, the government of the Peru, sent it up to Mexico, and by Acapulco and departure, all have gone on to Philippines with a direct silver demand by the Chinese. So that was a very active route with 30% of the silver heading back to Spain. And not to forget, because the Potosi silver that had allowed Philip II and his wars with England, supported by Mary Queen of Scots, the dispute between the Roman Catholic kingdom and the Queen Elizabeth of the Church of England. So just a little bit of this part of history that I am track and trace in a very broad sense, along with the business, where I have come to this point about introducing by graphic, by the 20 plus graphic from this presentation. I may not give it in the precise order as I speak, but I will continue to present to my audience, so you can have a view. And here I am making some mistakes here already, but nevertheless, bear with me, and then we'll move on. And in what I have here, I'm going a little bit the reverse order. Is that what I would like to starting at the beginning again, the image.
Qual imagem para voltar, Paul?
Dois.
Peraí, vou te ajudar. Só um minuto. Peraí, deixa eu tirar as outras.
Quero subir com 2 a 3 para cima. Me ajuda.
Isso. Aqui?
Não, de baixo. Aqui, meu. 2, isso, 3.
Ah, tá.
And so posso falar agora?
Pode.
And so this is, I am giving you different frames. Continue on the story about the psychology of round and square. And this is part of the image. I will give the image first. The rest of the presentation I will do in another segment. Faz a segundo, this is part of the image of 3 C's. As you can see, I put the cultural sphere in the broader sphere where they're hosting my students and myself engagement, and the communication dynamics. You will see that in the next figure. Next. This is a little bit futuristic. We all will see the 3 civilizations. What is ahead is going to be. I will talk about the next level involving the future, the psychological civilization, economic civilizations and ecological civilization. This aspect, you can talk about what is ahead. The civilization, the fourth civilization of the globe, you talk about the Nile, Egypt, Mesopotamia, with the two rivers, with the two of the older civilizations had vanished, and both they were forced by war, by destruction of the nomads or invaders. But in all these regional civilizations, because there was the water that had allowed the cultivation of grains, which unfortunately had invited the nomads or the people from the north, not having the same access like the Romans, and then like the Vikings coming north, threatening the Middle Europe and wanted land with England. We'll talk about all this civilization development destruction on its own. But the four basic global civilizations, we talk about the Nile River, the first, and Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians had actually a much richer civilization. Unfortunately, we have not been able to decode and decipher what they have written on top of the clays, but all over this region, from the Babylonian, from the Macedonian, from the Greeks, and to the eventually the Aryans or Persians, so to speak, and they were destroyed, and without able to find mechanisms or scholarly work to keep learning about the old civilization until the later on Europeans, even with the conquest of Napoleon, has started the interest about the Egyptian, the culture of Egypt. Same goes with the Hindu Valley in that part of the west part of India. Civilization came, wonderful structure have left, a wonderful, very civil society with bathtubs, with all the how they channel, making canal for the human waste water. That was a very rich cultural group, but then again, had left nothing behind for people to learn more. And the fourth civilization I just briefly mentioned, that which I take pride about the Chinese side of it, is because China, with the two rivers both heading from the west to the east, were blocked by the Gobi Desert in the north. It's a natural landscape creating a blockage for the nomad to come south. And the mountains south of China with Himalaya blocking from the area of the India, and also the entrance of the Aryans, where history have recorded they would come very close to even to the Shang dynasty, with the discovery of the human skeleton bones and living mummies with the European tracks and traces. And then from the east is the ocean. So China was very fortunate where their culture, their cultivation, were managed in these two river basins. And ever since in 3300, the written language now we discover called the oracle bones in the Shang dynasty, happening about 3,300 years ago, had allowed China a ongoing and continuous recording history for over 3,300 years and more. What is beyond the 3,300 had relics, had jade, had other artifacts that shown more than 5,500 up to 10,000 years ago. But in this time and moment, the Chinese, the archaeological teams and the cultural anthropology scholars are still searching for the other evidence with written words to validating the registry of history of China. Next, Gustavo. And so what happens is that by mentioning this, the four civilizations very quickly, we're coming back to the 3C communication system. As you shall see from this picture here, the communication dynamics basically is adapting from the image of what I have adapted from the transactional analysis of Eric Burns. But it's more than that. Instead of just the three spheres, there's, if you look to the right, by our dialogue, by our sharing, the shapes can shape into square, and then eventually, when the square turns sideways, it's become a triangle. This I will become more. I will speaking more on another presentation. This system of the psychology round and square, how it started with the 3 C's, is going to be very important. And the most important yet is the cultural spheres. It seems to be that I carry the many cultural spheres when and where I have to shift to a different use of languages or expressions. Next. This is just an overall view. You can see the 3 C's at the bottom, and then moving up the psychology round and square. And I'm coming into the consciencology studies, and then the conscienciological civilization that I hope I wish for, and the many of the functional use of the cultural spheres also will be presented from the future presentations and broadcast or podcast. Next. Here's one of my showing the many great scholars during my time from my undergraduate, from 67 to 72, and from 72 to 74, 74 to 76. Carl Rogers is one of the many American psychologists, which I label during this last 40, 50 years, less with the Freudian psychosexual dynamics, but much more into this, I call it the opening, the humanist ideas, very much involving in the education, counseling. And he is one of my role models that I follow with some of his conditions for therapeutic changes. But even you can see I am starting to modify in his way about talking about congruence, that we have, when we are not in conflict, what I wish, what I want, can be a square or a round. A square is basically you put yourself into a bracket, into a square, and then when square turns, you become hostile, you get the triangle. But I can use the language, which I'm starting to do also, with all the former teachers that I do have my deep respect, directly, maybe subconsciously, they already have used some of the spheres. So this is just one example. I will continue on to show how unconditional positive regards is no longer, in this terminology alone, Rogers no longer using the Freudian terms, such we're calling people catatonic, people as a schizophrenic, paranoia, whatever terminology. Rogers basically take a lift, and he emphasized you have to have empathy, sympathy, and then he's looking for how congruent we are. So basically, it's following very similar. The language are basically the same, but we all manifest it differently. Different techniques, be that transactional analysis or be Rogers, unconditional positive regards. Next. A little bit jumping ahead of the gun, but in this open chat, I hope the world start to look at. I put this term conscience efficiency, and then conscience proficiency, because as long I'm into the psycholinguistic area, what I'm trying to indicate to my audience, the Chinese have come a long way from 200 years of defeat, humiliation, and to the long years of the struggle with the Civil War and with the Japanese invasion, not 8 years, but actually 12 years. Part of the Japanese invasion was literally granted by the Versailles Treaty when the Europeans taken away the German possession of the Qingdao city and the Shantung area in the northeast of China, instead returning to Chinese as part of the Allies and the alliance in World War I. They have turned the entire region, the German possession, to the Japanese. That was the idea and the induction to make that region ceding and to invite Japan's entry. Perhaps one of their quiet subtle war was already about engaging the future conflicts with the Russians. Next. Also, with the same graphic, we'll be also having a lot more interface. This is my new platform. It's called Open Books. What is coming into our arena that I want to share with my audience? Okay, we are already into this coming decade of the digital age, the moving from IT into AI, artificial intelligence with the unlimited amount of data and the host of the cloud. Learning by me is an unending affair. The open books in the future, in conjunction working with the many platforms such as GPT, such as also with Claude and Gemini. These are just the American-based, Western-based AIs. And I just assuming, there will be more from other cultures. I am tying in on my daily research. I put my open book by adding a U as evolving. It's going to become a universal learning in seconds. I give an example. By my presentation today, in what I'm working on to work the open book format, the entire broadcast will be using a visual effect. If you do a YouTube broadcast, all the words you want to mark them into the different languages, and the people can read from your narrative in their own languages. If that one particular language, using as English, can be taped, maybe collaboratively with YouTube, the entire text will come, and then we can add it, because phonetically some of the sounding, some of the pronunciation may not give the perfect writing, but a minor editing with the same presentation will be launched into open book. And from the open book, you will have a total printout and in listing of the time and seconds. Now imagine this is going to be another option to make the presentation in visual. By any slight pause by the speaker, they can already turn it into 160 plus languages, speaking at the native tongue of the audience. And itself, the same process repeats itself, and the printout can be done in Russian, in Romanian, in Portuguese, in Spanish, French, likewise. So the book, open book, is an issue when the written format is done and still a live document. And any given time, the people who sign onto open books, of course, you have to have your basic rule and order. So you can actually come into my document with your registry. You can insert into that particular document. Perhaps I was saying a few words in Russian that was not correct in spelling or speaking. A participant can do the correction immediately. That participant already become part of the integrative team, and all people can participate. Instead, I'm giving this oral presentation. We can read on paragraphs. If I'm a teacher, I'm assigning my students to read on a certain paragraph or pages of Mark Twain. And then the book will be allowed the students to come in to have their input. Be that critical, then you put in a different ink. You can use any color representing. A blue, you're adding on value. A red, you're criticizing. A green, you are basically applauding, enhancing. Or any color with the highlight that you use. I'm really thinking that in the open book format, nobody will become ignorant for long. And ignorance is not a crime, nor a sin, but only when you continue fixated, or using the Freudian, your fixation. Regardless what is changed, I still don't like that particular person because my nationalistic conviction, I would like to see, the Chinese as an enemy, and I would like to see the Indians as offensive, because we all have been given the ideas and image that shapes our thinking. And I think the open book format can be very dynamic. And also, I'm not ashamed to say, this can be also a very, very profitable in a monetary system. But with my age, with what I'm doing today, I see the monetary compensation side of it will all go into different foundations for nonprofit projects. But here is just a basic dynamic side of education and learning, how we're using all this, the AI assisted, the discovery of your text. Also, there will by open book also is in itself a blockchain in the system of AI. What blockchain is, that you can no longer just making up your stories. If you talking about a story, a fantasy, a game creation, that's one thing. But when we go into historical facts, as a matter of fact, I'm using the Claude to become and ChatGPT become almost a forensic discovery, where I found that the wrongs and the criminality of the past government activities. And so this is a very dynamic time for all of us. Next, otro. I'm asking my assistant to give me, my partner to help me with this. Also, open books interfacing with Gemini. Open book will be interfaced with other languages like Chinese in the future, in Portuguese, in Spanish, in whatsoever language, but also in all these three systems, I can already automatically doing that in multiple languages. And what is very exciting for me in my developing my book, The Pedagogy of Conscience, working with Claude, they have been able to use my Chinese, Portuguese, English, and Spanish. So the thought process when I'm using in my cross-cultural life, in the terminologies, Claude had already been able to interface without any effort. They're basically understanding that I am speaking in 4 languages with 5 different terminologies. Next. By going on with this presentation here, the emphasis I will continue to using the psychology round and square, and I will talk about how to interface from my early started 3 C's otro to the application with the 3 C's to psychology round and square and into the conscientology studies. And here's again the interface. By me having the open book, we already have the concept doing something similar to GPT. I just call it books GPT. So, but this is almost like giving a suggestion to any one of you. Imagine eventually we will have a GPT capturing only on the all Native American tribes, languages, sound, all of that. So the search for scholars will be much easier. Maybe the books will be concentrated on one dynasty of the Chinese and separate books for different era, say Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance. But I am just saying that today we can all participating in the use of the system in any way you see fit. The speed, the acceleration of what we have today is in seconds, not minutes. The interpretation, the access for the information, and the search is much more speedier. And by speed, that means efficiency. If the speed is efficiency, and by the using the open book as a blockchain, will be do exactly the ATRA screening by all participants. Maybe I'm speaking out of turns, maybe I'm speaking out of time and period by quoting back different era and dynasty, and especially how can we not enjoy this system as I'm going back to reading Greek mythology. I just want to know the relationship and the sexual relationship between Zeus and the other deity or fairies or the nymphs in the Greek mythology. I think learning is no longer has to be listened to the great orator like Homer and his storytelling. I am doing part of the Homer's work. But today we have visuals, we have evidence, we have documents. If I make minor error, my good audience will correct it, and where we can all appreciating, not feeling insulted or hurt nor harm, because this is what the world great learning can be. And with this open learning, perhaps we can find more ways to become more peacefully engaged to one or another, instead the money we spend on the warfares. Next. I'm giving you all the visual from this presentation in a very open format also. I intend to do all this work until the end of this year. And then the next year, I will structure to organize to do it in such a way I will have engagement, interviews by Zoom or by Google Meet or by any other media to have exchange views and commentaries to make this program richer. Mais Gustavo. This is a repeat of the other graphic. We're talking about blockchain immunity. We talk about IoT, Internet of Things is happening. You talk about books, GPT is Internet of Things. You talk about the up and coming ambience, environment, the situations called the spatial web. The spatial web's already happening. when I'm going back to talk about a part of history, that history already going into a cylindrical format, because by me seeing one view, even I have a 4 or 5 languages backing that system of the search with all this ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, with all this AI assisted search, will give you a much, much richer view. And I am welcoming. I'm welcoming their correction so that I can have a better perception of time and history. Otro. Going back, emphasizing this line here, psychocultural linguistics. And I am, as I'm forming the new vocabularies, encouraged even by Claude, by my other, I look at some of them as almost like an assistant in a bring out the point, counterpoint. And the book is already 168 pages in less than 2.5 weeks, plus all the editing. I hope the book of this pedagogy of conscience, if I can, I would like to publish its entirety with all the add-on suggestions, comments by my interaction with Claude. Because if I can get moving into this direction, imagine millions of my audience can do the same, where they were searching for the richer context than what we already know. And I'm paying my deepest respect to the modern day, in search of truth, in search of great evidence of things. Next.
Essa era a última.
Volta por primeiro. I'm going to back to the first page. As many you can see, I am still having a little assistance by Gustavo, my partner I'm here in Williams Bay, and Gustavo Melges is in Marília, São Paulo. We are working jointly into developing the videos on YouTube and now this podcast, Otro, to allow me to present by image. Visual is validating the psychology of round and square, also written in Chinese. 圆方心理学 Otro. And again, this is the cultural sphere, not in a dynamic form. I use my early graphics so people can also learn what I do, or perhaps you can do better than what I do. On the left-hand side, I have my Freudian psychoanalysis, which is the super ego ID. The big story about Freud is all about psychologists dealing with human anxiety, be that anxiety coming from hunger or coming from over-sexual drive. The idea is the psychosexual dynamics. And believe me that no matter what we think of the Sigmund Freud, into his times of a cultural sphere, is we can look at that. The Sigmund Freud's time period about human sexuality was responding to the Victorian era of that kind of a cultural sphere. We still having in our different cultural groups, we're still having our different level of anxiety, one time or another, repressed collectively by society. No one is at fault. I give you one very simple how the Freudian psychoanalysis manifested by the psychosexual dynamic of ID had allowed his wife's nephew, a known American, is almost a guru, almost a hero, by the name of Edward Bernays. He became known as the king of propaganda. He has become moving the American industry from food to cigarettes. For those who want to watch 3 hours learning lessons about the century of the self produced by Adam Curtis of BBC, you can see how Freudian psychosexual dynamics had continuous influence the entire American marketing, sales, every day, how we become pressurized. Like it or not, that happens. In the middle is the ego, and the superego is the cultural side. And for those of you, if you remember, there's a little monkey on the left-hand side on the first presentation. That monkey is my, I call it altera, alternate ego. If you're a youngster, you have imagination, you read. We talk about youngsters, young people like anywhere. When we're starting as a kid, we look at the heroes, the fighters, the people who combat, the people who have shield and sword, the knights of the round table, Prince Valiant, moving up to the American Western, the cowboys, Wyatt Earp, But in that Asian era, at my age, at 9, 10 years old or younger, that story of the Monkey King today is back almost into vogue, with China creating the very first game called the Black Myth of the Wukong. And I will talk more about the superego. The superego is the part where we got enculturated. Then we got we learned and acquire maybe civility to balance, and the ego is do the juggling act between the demand of the ID, the id, and then the culture of the superego. Immediately from this Freudian crossover to the sphere of influence by the transactional analysis, or by the creator of Eric Burns, and they simply modified that into the 3 ego states, into the parent, adult, and child. And by that, their communication, they're speaking to each other. I have done it with enlarge the sphere of the parent when we're talking down to a child, but not talking down to diminish the status of the ego of the youngster. So this is where the adjustment I've made from the Freudian psychoanalysis to transactional analysis, and then with the shaping of my 3 C's. I think some of the graphics will give you some idea what this is all about. Next. As many of you know, that I'm still handicapped. A repeat of the 3 C's into a more, I think the visual will give you a more in-depth understanding how important, if nothing of the 3 C's, is about all the spheres. Next. I will still emphasize the up and coming future in our human race. If we start to learn about conscience, and the conscience civilization, the consciological civilization, will be of great value. The economic civilizations, if you want to emphasize how that is being done, we can talk about without the abuse of the banking, without abuse of the usury. Civilization had created anxiety, and because sometimes we have the mixed citizen accountable, but we also have the mixed system to not to become abusive. That's one part of economic civilization. Ecological civilization, we can talk about what China is doing today with electric cars. For the last 15, 20 years, while we talk about ecology, and China's gone in full force to create an electric vehicle in the use of the different mineral systems to create the batteries, durable batteries. Now we're talking about they can even do maybe 1,000 up to 1,500 kilometers per charging. This is all happening before we put our biases onto it, and that's why I think the psychology round and square is opening up the communication elements in us, between us, and we hope we can shape a richer civilization in the future. Otro. One more time, emphasizing how psychology round and square, if you look into the right side, that the blue is a square, the round is green, and the triangle, all three shapes, and the three shapes commands the entire psychology round and square. That's where I feel the psychology round and square will not be limited to any language, any cultural group. I'm thinking this since I started my study of psychology, and before that, I was between going to college and entering the seminarian school in Brazil with the Salesians. And my focus was how to work with the Indians. Equally curiosity of the vastness of Brazil with the tribal cultures and the territory, and also my sympathy, my sentiment about the Brazilian favelas, the city on the outside the city get urbanized without any kind of control, without any kind of system. They just become a huge shanty town with poverty, with the totally broken infrastructure. And if I dare my Salesians clergy to go into the favelas to do counseling, and this is one of my focus also about the formation of the 3 C's, which had led to the psychology round and square. Next. One more time. Next. Rogers. Otro. Conscious efficiency, even though I'm throwing out these words, you can digest, rethink, and how to go about it. Otro. Open book is, I have said it before, and I will try to end here to my audience. Please give me feedbacks. I can go on, but I will rather to go on more specifically on the next presentation with the dynamics showing how the 3 C's had taken me and walked me into the psychology round and square. And I hope in the future I will be able to giving lectures. And I make the assumption that for 45 minutes I can make everybody into a good counselor. Okay. And thank you for your attention, and I wish you all the best. Good night. Parou. Gustavo, a única coisa, Gustavo,